joining us this morning. Welcome to our May 2023 TPA or 2024 TPA membership meeting. We appreciate you joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and get us started this morning. My name is Craig Douglas. I work with Patrick at the Provider Alliance, and we appreciate everybody joining us this morning for our meeting. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are recording the session today, so if you have any issues during the course of the meeting, if you get pulled for any reason, you can just email information@provideralliance.org, and we'll be sure to send you a link as soon as it renders for the meeting. We'll also follow up with all the materials and attachments in an email to everybody, so you can look for that in the next couple of days. We are using the chat and the Q&A function today, so if you have any comments or questions, feel free to pop those in the chat and or in the question and answer section, and we'll be able to work with any of our guests today to raise those questions as they come up. So again, welcome everybody. Just wanted to overview a couple of upcoming TPA meetings and events. So on June 13th, we are going to host our Human Resources Committee meeting. On June 18th, we're going to host our TPA Integrated Care Committee meeting. So we'll be sending out some registration for those, a link for registration. If you haven't joined those in the past, you're welcome to do so. They're a great opportunity for people who are interested in those topics to kind of get together and talk about things that are going on in your space, questions, best practices, things like that. So keep an eye out for those registration links. On June 28th, we will host another virtual membership meeting for June. This will serve as our annual meeting. So we'll certainly keep you posted on what we'll cover in that meeting. And again, very similar to what your experiences in the past, we'll sort of put those out for registration and send some reminders out. And last, we just wanted to mention that on July 26th, we're going to be hosting our TPA conference. This will be at the Regional Learning Alliance in Cranberry. Similar to what we did last year, so we're really excited about that. Our theme this year is to unite, advocate, and thrive as a system. So we're going to be sending out some information. Probably today, registration will open for that. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are going to happen on the website here in just a few minutes. The other thing we wanted to mention here is that we heard from our last PBC, or performance-based contracting webinar, that members are really interested in additional workshops. We've heard that. We're in the planning stages of putting some of those together for you. So keep an eye out on your email. We'll certainly be providing some updates and opportunities for people to register for some of those workshops as we develop the content for that. So again, here's our promo for our July 26th conference. This will be held at the Regional Learning Alliance. What's going to be unique about it this year is that this is kind of aligned with a couple of exciting things that we're able to sort of release with our new member platform. So all of our member anybody who is part of a member organization and has been on our mailing list, we've been able to load you into our website platform as a member. So in the next probably week, we'll be sending out welcome letters, emails to everybody who has an email address and tied to a member organization. This will give you access to our member-only portal. On that member-only portal, there will be opportunities for you to join forums, like we talked about the HR committee, the integrated care committee. There is an opportunity for those committees to engage with each other sort of real time as things come up. It's a place where we'll be able to post jobs if you're interested in sharing some jobs with the TPA community. And there's a number of other options to see events coming up, and it's a really nice landing page for all of our members. So keep an eye out. The email will come from our information@provideralliance.org. You'll see that it'll say, your email address has been loaded into our system. It'll give you a temporary password, and you'll be able to log in. What's really important about that is as we get closer and registration opens for the conference, all members who will attend the conference obviously will have free attendance for that. So you'll need a member login to access the system. If for any reason you don't get an email that provides you with your member login and your password, you can just email us at information@provideralliance.org. Note the organization that is the member organization that you're with, and we'll be sure to process those and get you set up so that you can register for the conference. We're going to do a really brief video, and we'll send that around in email for everybody on our membership list. And if you, it'll just give you some guidelines and ways to sort of log in and just a quick tutorial. So keep an eye out for that. Anybody who's not a member, if you're interested in joining, this is a great opportunity to get access to member-only information on the website and through the portal. Lastly, we've done a lot of work in the last couple of months finalizing our mobile application. So we're really happy to report that we have it published in the Apple Store right now. We are still working out a couple of bugs in the software, but the mobile app is out there. So if you're interested and you'd like to go download that app, you can just go to the Apple Store, type in the Provider Alliance. I think we're listed as the Provider Alliance Connect. And you can download our app. It will give you access to the list of members, and it will be a place where we'll be able to do push notifications as we get closer to the conference, and things that we'll be promoting during the conference session. So keep an eye out for those two things. We have not forgotten about the Google Play Store. So we are working on getting that published. We should have that finalized here in about 2 weeks. So we'll let you know as soon as it's available for any of the Android or Google users so that you can download the app from the Google Play Store as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Patrick. I think I've sort of blabbered on enough. I'll let Patrick take it from here. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you, Craig. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here today. So, I do just want to backtrack on a couple of things that Craig has already talked about here. So, the conference, again, we're excited about. We always get great participation and support from the Office of Developmental Programs. Kristen Ahrens, again, is going to come out, be part of our panel discussion. We always begin with a conversation with the deputy. She'll be bringing her leadership team as well. We have a lot of development underway in terms of program content. It will be an all-day conference. So this is, correct me where I'm wrong, Craig, the 3rd year in a row. I think this has grown each year that we've done it. So I think it's important, aligned with kind of the things that Craig just talked about in terms of member benefits, member login. I'm pleased to report that we're able to once again keep the conference free for TPA members. We're working with some sponsors, and we're very confident that we'll be able to have some sponsors participate. We'll have some exhibitors. So if you're out there as an associate member or vendor supporting the IDA community, there'll be some opportunities to be there as well and to exhibit some of the services that you provide. But if you've been there before, thank you. We think that particularly last year went really well. We sold about 175 tickets, again, free tickets. We plan to issue about 200 tickets this year. So we will ask you, please register. If you're not able to attend, please hold off. If you do register and you find that you can't come, please cancel out the registration, because I know we got to the end last year and some folks did want to join and we were sold out. And I think we probably just told them to go ahead and show up. But for the organization of the event, for the food, making sure everything is situated properly, we will open that registration. I believe Craig and I, we're talking about next week. So we'll launch the campaign around that. That will be important, that in order to access the free registration, that you're logged in as a member. So I know Craig mentioned we'll push out the notifications as far as making sure you have logins. I know many of you have been in there trying to log into the system. So we're really looking forward to the event. And again, I'll say here to remind myself and Craig that the RLA is really great about dietary restrictions. We'll try to make sure we accommodate those, give you an opportunity to state if you have any sort of allergies or things that we can notify the venue and make sure that there's food and everything available for you. So we really look forward to this. You can look forward to this rolling out next week officially with the opening of registration, and then we will continue to promote as we build out program content. And we expect to have a similar format as last year, where we had panel discussions, various guests and subject matter experts. ODP I mentioned. I know we also will be having Donna Martin from Anchor attend in person. So, this will be a live event, attendance in person. But we will also simulcast this, so remotely you're able to participate. We'll stay on time with segments, so we don't expect people to be at their computers all day, but a particular panel discussion that interests you, you can tune in at that time. And we'll make sure that everybody has access to do that. So I will also say that obviously we do this in Western PA, but we think it's a nice opportunity to come to Western PA. We're right along the Turnpike 79 corridor. You can get anywhere from the Erie Shore down through Pittsburgh to Washington County. So we know that we have a lot of members across the state now who are exclusively in the Northeast, the Southeast. So we do encourage everybody to come out. It's on a Friday, so you can spend the weekend here. But keep in touch with us with questions you may have. And again, we look very much forward to opening registration and continuing to advise everybody on the content. I will go back and also say that we noticed this when we opened registration in terms of placing it on the agenda. Next month's meeting, the June meeting, will be our annual meeting. So we always conduct a little bit of business as part of that meeting as our annual meeting. So I'll remind everybody that we will be putting forth our slate of board members once again. We do have a full board, and we've recently added board members. So we thank our board. We thank all of you for your participation, but do want to let everybody know about that and remind you of it. And I'll also say I'm really excited about the mobile app. I do think it's something that has been in the works for a while because we feel that it's very important to be able to reach TPA members wherever they are. There's a lot of features that we're going to build into this. Again, there's some debugging that needs to be done right now. It will be out on Google Play shortly, as Craig mentioned. It is available in the Apple Store if you're an Apple user. So encourage you to download the app. Again, with push notifications, you'll be able to register for meetings. The full calendar is already available there now to register. So accessing ODP announcements, news, those sorts of things that you can do on the go just by going to the app. We're very excited to be rolling that out. And as Craig said, we'll have some tutorial videos available on the website as well. So with that, I think that this slide really was just to sort of pick up the last actual meeting we had was at the Representative Dan Miller Disability and Mental Health Summit. So I thought this was a good jumping off point to really sort of go into today's discussion. We're going to first, before we get into ODP updates, really just talk about budget a little bit. And I do want to backtrack since it's been a long time since we've had a membership meeting. We have, however, hosted several meetings, so it feels like we've been getting together pretty frequently, which we have. May 3rd, we did have the performance-based contracting workshop, what to know and how to succeed. So based on that, as Craig noted, we did conduct a poll during that session to see if people wanted to have more of those sessions, and they did overwhelmingly. I believe it was 100% of those of you who attended and voted indicated that you would like to continue those sessions. We do have that under development. Our plan is really to look at infrastructure, partnerships, again, delivering ways that we can help you as members be successful in this new environment of performance-based contracting. So more to be reported soon. We will get a workshop scheduled and registration open soon on that. That will be virtual, remote, so you'll have easy access to join that. We also conducted a session on fee schedule rates, really as part of our financial management committee, chaired by Tom Krofchek. We were also joined by Chris Elliott from Barber Center and Chris Saylor from Keystone Human Services, Daniel Green from PA Connecting Communities to talk about rates, the proposed rates, really give a good analysis. Chris Elliott had a tool that he shared with members for calculating the impact of proposed rates on your organization. So also another great session that I was grateful to be able to have members participate in, and hopefully many of you who participated in it found it very beneficial. So with that, we'll go ahead here and to the next slide, Craig. I do want to sort of, obviously this is not a new slide, but I felt that this really reflects where we are today. So this headline from Valentine's Day of 2024, legislators must keep Shapiro's disability care funding intact. That is still where we are today. This headline remains relevant. And we're going to hear a lot about, I'm sure, performance-based contracting today. That'll be a large theme. We have other content, of course, but one of the things that we all want to emphasize is really the importance of making sure that each of us as members, that we continue to do our work at the association level and encourage everyone to reach out to your own legislators to support the budget. That is really where we are situated today. And while we know there is a lot of discussion about performance-based contracting, If you're a residential provider, we just want to remind everyone out there, because we know performance-based contracting doesn't directly affect everyone currently, but the worst case scenario is not being in a primary tier. The worst case scenario is not having this budget be approved and no rate increases occur for the community system, period. So it's vitally important that everybody reach out to your legislator. Craig, if you can drop in our voter voice link, we've made it very easy for you to just contact your legislator supporting the budget. Politically speaking, at the end of the day, it probably comes down to budget negotiations that involve very few people, leadership, the governor's office, of course, leaders in the legislature. However, it is important when those leaders are able to say they have heard from their constituents, they have heard from their members. And by doing that outreach to them, it makes it really important that they understand that they have constituents who are served by this system. There are family members served and not served by this system. And every single legislator in the state has multiple people on the waiting list for services. So we want to encourage everyone to continue to do this work. I want to thank and acknowledge our government advocacy committee here at TPA. As I've said many times, this is a committee that has been meeting weekly for, I can't even tell you how long anymore. Nancy Murray has been chairing this committee, even though she has recently retired from her provider job with Achieva in the Arc of Greater Pittsburgh. Gary Blumenthal from Envision, Will Stennett, these are original members of the G&A committee. And I want to say that that formed probably 5 years ago. And for the last several years, again, these are folks that have been meeting on a weekly basis. Also, Tom Profchek, Rita Gardner from Melmark, Chuck Sweeter from Keystone Human Services, Karen Jacobson from Emmaus, John Hamlin from Whole Life, Bill Harriger, Bob Barber from Barber National Institute. Sorry if I'm missing anybody. I know we have members that have come and participated, but I wanted to acknowledge those folks. And I want to ask each of you to really, now for the month of June, really do the outreach, contact your legislators. We have everything in the toolkit on the website, handouts, you can send these along. Sharing these with your staff, stakeholders in your community, such as your board, very critically important that we continue to deliver the message and that this budget does get approved so that the rate increases can be enacted. And at some point, effective July 1, these rate increases can be effective and you can start to invoice and they can start to support your services. So I did just want to make sure that I covered all of that internally. If you go to the next slide, Craig, I also want to emphasize the continuing work that TPA and all of the associations now are doing jointly. So these are the provider associations. They're listed at the bottom. I know that many of you belong to other associations. And I also want to say that this goes beyond just these associations. There are parent and family groups. I think we've really effectively been able to rally the stakeholder community. And I don't mean us as the associations. I think everybody has really rallied around the issue of the importance of workforce, the impact inflation has had on service capacity, and the need for investment. And fortunately, our governor has stepped forward to commit to that investment, not only in a budget line item, but to really talk about this as a multi-year growth strategy. So I want to again thank and acknowledge everybody you see on screen here. These are talking points that are available again right on our website. This handout is available on our website. A sample letter, if you would like to ask your legislator, which we urge you to do, to send that letter to their party leadership so that it is in writing. We have received 3 letters from Senate Republicans that I'm aware of, commitments for several other letters to be sent by members who have been met with, by TPA members and members from other associations, family members, DSPs, self-advocates. Everybody is really rallying around this effort. And the month of June is really the time when we need to be our most active. So thanks to all of you who have already done that. We'll ask your continued help and participation until this budget does become a reality. With that, one of the events that's upcoming is a press conference that's been scheduled at the state capitol on June 26th at 10 a.m. All of these associations will be present. We will have a self-advocate, family member, DSP providing some testimony on behalf of our community. A couple of legislators are being scheduled to speak as well in a very bipartisan effort, supportive effort. We think it may be critical timing in terms of getting the budget done on time, which is due by the end of the year, June 30th. So with that, the last thing I'll say is the ability for the associations to remain unified really is an effort that's built over the last couple of years. Our board president, Ruth Siegfried, at TPA, rallied, independent of any of the associations, a meeting of CEOs across the state. The second session brought in the leadership of the associations. And from there, we decided we needed to take that ball and run with it. So my gratitude to all the associations. It really goes back to that work to bring everybody together. Everybody has remained committed to that. And we'll ask all of you to hold us accountable to you to make sure that we carry this through to the finish line the rest of the way. So again, we're looking at doing this in the month of June. Critically important that this budget has the investment that the governor has proposed. So next slide, Craig, if you can please. Just briefly, I want to say these are a few things that will drop into chat today. That there'll be some handouts basically that you can refer to. We'll talk a little bit about them. I'm going to bring Jeremy Yale in momentarily. The first thing that I'll mention by way of saying this first item here is our TPA comment letter regarding performance-based contracting. This was just submitted yesterday. We wanted to make sure that you as members had an opportunity to see it at this meeting. So we will likewise push it out. It's probably been posted to our site already. We want to urge everybody to submit your own letters. The letters are due next Tuesday, June 4th, before midnight. And it's really important that you articulate your individual concerns and issues constructively so that hopefully there can be some changes made. Our letter is directed strategically at certain items that we would like to see changed or improved, but nobody knows better the impact on your organization than you. So we encourage everybody to take advantage of the comment process for performance-based contracting and also for the proposed fee schedule rates. So those deadlines, again, June 4th, you have a copy of our letter. We will probably take a moment or here too as we are available and have the time to do that, to maybe call a few things out. And next slide, Craig. Fortunately, we have with us today Jeremy Yale, who agreed to join us from ODP and talk about a few things from ODP's perspective. A lot of new information has dropped. So from our agenda, these are the things that we made note of before this meeting. And we'll leave these up for a moment, and then we'll go next slide, Craig, and just introduce Jeremy and bring you on. Thanks for being here with us today, Jeremy.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Craig. Good morning, everyone. All of your members. Looks like you have a good turnout. I see 179 folks on the call. So really great way for me to start the day talking about performance-based contracting with a captive audience. But I
do
do
get
have
the next slide, and we have some things I know, Jeremy, you and I talked about, and then we can backtrack to things that also we shared the agenda with you. Anything you'd like to talk about, but we do have obviously performance-based contracting. We know you put a lot of things out there, so we just wanted to let you kind of kick off with wherever you would like to begin on what you see as most important from ODP's perspective.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I have a few slides that I can share in just a minute, but sticking with this slide, right? So hopefully everyone on the call with a vested interest in this has found both the provider preparedness self-assessment tool as well as the provider preparedness workbook. So I think they are pretty self-evident in kind of their approach and what we're attempting to do. They really are tools for providers to begin to translate what the draft metrics are looking like and begin to kind of filter their own agencies through those measures. And I think as agencies have begun to tackle this, I think what you'll find is that this really is, there's a lot in here that is currently expected and things that you're already doing. And there are some areas where there will be growing pains in the next few years as we look for attestations of new work to be done. But hopefully you and your teams are finding these resources useful. And then the workbook really is exactly that. It's another combination of the measures and really was designed to allow providers to work within teams, get some, what I'll refer to as some sloppy notes on where you're at, and really help you to build towards your agency's goals. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Let's see.
You should be okay to do that, Jeremy. If you'd rather just send them over to me or Craig, we'd be happy to run it for you too. There you go.
Okay, great. These are, again, slides that likely folks have seen, but just to level set around where we're at, time and place. So again, on April 20th, this group is aware that, there we go. This group is aware that we submitted for public comment a 1915B4 and a C waiver, which included an implementation plan, our recommended changes on 1915C, and those proposed rates. We're still open in public comment, as I think Patrick had indicated in his slide. We just actually received yesterday TPA's formal response to public comment. So I just like to thank Patrick for your leadership, as well as all of your members that thought about this and thought about it critically and dedicated your thoughts and experiences to those public comment. In terms of process, we are close to closing. So we had this open for 45 days to give, we knew it was a lot of content, a lot of material, really wanted the field to be able to have some time with it, sit with it, and really think about its impact. So after July 4th, that will send us into a next phase of this, where we are then really amassing and organizing all of the public comments that we've received, both in writing and orally during public comment sessions. From there, we will align those, not only the different topics and themes that we've received, but then really begin the process of realigning what our draft documents are looking like, the 1915B4 as well as the C. If you are still interested as an organization, you still have time to make public comments, you can get that into the web address, the email account listed here. RA stands for resource account, or you can do that through snail mail and send that to Julie Michon at the following address. So, I'm hoping that all of your members are in tune with this. Patrick, it sounds like you're just doing a lot of really great work. Personally, I was just impressed by the fact that you're getting a TPA mobile app. I mean, that in and of itself is pretty cool. But hosting performance-based contracting workshops, I think, again, I can only imagine the value to your membership with activities like that. I think it's complementary to the work that we're going to be doing over the month of June with the provider preparedness summits. But where that might be a little bit different is some of the crosstalk that can happen in a work group or a workshop type of session, where I can tell you that the approach that we're taking is probably more technical. We really want to bridge from where we've published the draft performance measures in these sessions to giving providers a little bit more of the detail, kind of that process analysis or exactly how is ODP going to be measuring each of these things that we've said we're going to measure. So having some opportunity to expand on that and just giving you a little insight into how we're structuring these. We have broken these out into to different areas, and one of the questions. Patrick had shared a few leftover questions, maybe from the last time Kristen was out with your membership. And one of the questions was, for the preparedness summits, will the topics be published? I'm not sure that we ever really discreetly published those, but I'm going to drop in the chat, or maybe Craig could help me out here. I can get back to my chat screen.
Is there something we can find for you, Jeremy, to drop in?
Yep. So again, this looks pretty coded, and it is. It's not real clean, but it will at least give you some idea around what topical areas we're going to be speaking on each of those days. So you'll see that drop in just a minute. So you'll need to break out the decoder ring, but or just simply use the codes for each of that are part of the self-assessment and workbook. So I have those linked here. I think perhaps Patrick had dropped those in. Here are the dates for the provider preparedness summits. June 3rd is our first kickoff. All of this is following the other announcement that Patrick had included, that we had released a general overview of the performance-based contracting in announcement 2448. So June 3rd, June 10th, we're going to be really focusing in on workforce. On June 12th, we have a variety of topics, but mostly focusing in on quality and some of the complex need dual diagnosis categories. And then in June 20th, kind of rounding out with employment and remote supports and some other topics. And then also to note, we will continue on providing quarterly provider forums beginning in September to really support providers' efforts around this. This is a partnership. For this to be successful, it really is a partnership for all of us to kind of raise the quality bar. We need to work together, and the intent of this is to establish some realistic markers and some measures so that we can begin to collectively, as a field, as a state, identify those things that are important and those things that we want to measure, and be able to compare ourselves and compare our progress as we do move forward with this. So this is, again, just an example of the preparedness tool. I'm assuming that everyone on the call is pretty familiar with that. So I'll just keep moving. The other point that I think is critical to understanding this process is that this is really designed to be a phase in. I know that it feels very, very fast. It feels like it's a lot all at once. But there are quite a few of the performance measures that are currently requirements. So there are things like incident management and the health risk screening tool, behavioral supports, and different requirements around following up with care after hospitalization and employment. These are things that are not necessarily new. These are things that we have been driving at. The some of the new performance areas that are going to begin on January 1 really are pretty heavily aligned with attestations. So it's providers committing to doing something in the future and looking at improving areas like credentialing and remote technology. And the nice thing about those two areas is that we've really slated those for some capacity building, looking to use that platform of performance-based, with pay for performance, so that we can really support providers to get some footing in those areas if those are new, for agencies that are already out in front and starting to work with this, continuing to support your efforts to identify plans and build, come up to capacity, and then really maintain those supports and services and richness of your organization. And then lastly, the reporting requirements in the first contract cycle will support development of performance targets for contract cycles beginning in 26, 27, and then subsequently in 27, 28. So again, this is a building process. Let me stop there with slides. And Patrick, I'm going to take a few of the questions that you had shared with me. I think they were pretty reasonable and in line with the kind of communication we want to be sharing. So there was a question that a member had asked, and thinking about base dollars with future funds, will future funds be given to AEs in order to pay for increased costs that will incur due to the rate increase? We have considered this in the past with rate increases. Considering the, specifically related to performance-based contracting, we have analyzed the number of individuals that are currently in receiving residential with base funds. And there are very few individuals that fall into that category. This is not really a concern that we've heard directly from counties at this stage. So at this point, we're not really planning in that direction.
Yeah, I wouldn't have noted this, Jeremy, when I sent you the question. I think that did come from an AE, just FYI. So
Okay.
That was the source of the question. But yeah, thanks for the
Sure.
explanation, and it just may be something to stay alert for in discussions with AEs.
Hopefully with and I can share those numbers too. Pull this up. Patrick, I've got too many screens open here. Try this again here. So on the topic of where status of the mid-year waiver release. So again, as this group knows, Governor Shapiro directed ODP to release additional 1,650 waiver slots. So I have some numbers to update on that. So of the 1,250 community living, so far 878 individuals have been newly enrolled in community living waiver. And of the 400 consolidated waivers, 310 have enrolled. So, just kind of contemplating that last question, there likely could have been individuals that were base funded and in residential services that could have received, a portion of those consolidated waivers to kind of augment their funding.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And we'll just ask any administrative entity reps who might be in the audience if they want to follow up. I don't know if we'll have time to get to everything today. We may have to do as we did from May 3rd, forward questions on to you and maybe follow up with members on
Sure.
anything further. So I think you've already answered a couple of other things that were sort of carried over from the May 3rd. If there's others that you see that you want to address, so
Yeah.
I think a lot of the information that you and ODP have put out and you've talked about here today does address a lot of it. And Craig can help me out if there's anything that we definitely want to call out that we felt, we've heard again, and we don't feel we've
Sure.
been able to deliver a clear answer on. With respect to some of the slides on performance-based contracting, Jeremy, and these are some things we did capture in our letter, but I wondered if you could provide any updates on, to begin with, the residential provider contracts that are pending. And, we addressed both the contract, as the writing of the letter yesterday, not yet available, not yet issued, and then the timeline indicating that it needs to be completed by June 30th. And the deputy secretary seemed to indicate some flexibility on that when that was raised during one of the feedback sessions. But do you have anything new to report about the provider contract being issued?
Yeah, so I can share that it is currently with legal. It is drafted. I have seen a final draft of that. I think as in a previous presentation, providers that are familiar with the current provider agreement, you will see very similar, a lot of similarities there. It is high level, right? Where there is not a great amount of detail related to all of the other components that we're really talking about. One of the areas that we had said in lieu of having all of this infrastructure built into the agreement, that will come out, and the intent for future the first publication and any future publications for the standards will come out in bulletin form, right? So we have some other vehicles to really convey and communicate that, as opposed to putting these into contracts and then having to, really track and revise these over time, which can be burdensome for providers, and tracking down some of these things is not always the best use, I think, collectively, of our time. So that is with legal. I don't have a target date of when that will be available, but it is pending.
Yeah, and thanks for the update, Jeremy. Just appreciate, if it were coming out today, obviously, that would be breaking news, but recognize if it's in legal, that can take some time. So I'll just call out, and it's in the letter, and you may have seen it already, but I'll call it out for members as well. We're just sort of asking for the leniency of not having that penalize providers. Sort of the way it's written out in the timeline is you can't submit documentation or performance data. ODP won't look at that for tier assignments unless you sign the contract, which again says by June 30th. So we know if that is in delay, that ODP will look at those issues and the implications of it. But that was one thing that we called out. And then the still, to my understanding, incomplete status of pay for performance. Is there anything you can comment on about the development of pay for performance standards and what that might look like?
Yeah, I can say that those are still in development. We have really shifted a lot of our effort to getting the standards and the preparedness summits available, so that we the collective whole of the field can continue to engage and learn about what's in the proposed measures. So they are still in development. I can share that credentialing is certainly one that we're interested in putting together. We may be attempting to leverage some additional funding for that, to be able to really support providers to build some capacity around credentialing. The other area is around employment that we're looking at right now, but I could just say that they're still in development.
Okay. Well, Jeremy, I'm sorry we've run short on time here. I want to give you the last word for anything else you would like to put out there that you think is important for our members to know about. And thank you once again for being here today.
Yeah, Thank you for the invitation. Patrick, I think you hit it. It was one of the more succinct ways that I've heard this described. And I'm going to quote you. Worst case scenario is not being in the primary category. It's the budget not passing. And so just again, really encourage everyone to get out there, talk about the critical nature of passing this budget. Rates we know are just critically important for our frontline staff and for the overall viability of our industry and of the work that we do. So with that, thank you for the invitation. Really appreciate it. I hope to see all of you join us Monday for our first preparedness summit, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for emphasizing the budget and the advocacy, and thank you for the work the department is doing to do that as well. Thanks again, Jeremy. Have a great rest of your day and weekend.
Be well.
Yep, you too. Okay, Craig, if you can bring us back to our deck, I would like to bring in and welcome Lydia Dawson, Anchor's Vice President of Government Relations. Lydia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so we were part-time neighbors there. I didn't get a chance to meet up with you in Idaho, which I just got back from, because I guess we would have had to travel about 200 miles each to meet in the middle. But we exchanged some emails, and there's a lot that's been happening. And I know you've tuned in here a little bit, so you've gotten to hear from Jeremy Yale, and I know you're very well aware of what's happening in Pennsylvania. So at kind of the exact same time that a lot of these final rules have been issued from the feds through CMS, we were getting proposed fee schedule rates, which we're very grateful for. That's something that the advocacy community here had been working toward for a long time, and sort of systematically and strategically for the past year or so, trying to get a rate review done so that there could be investment in this budget. And also, of course, performance-based contracting under a 1915b4 waiver application. So everybody's very busy here, but in the meantime, there is some really critical stuff happening at the federal level. So I know we've chatted a little bit, and I know you've done this for Anchor members. I would encourage everybody to watch your briefing on the overtime rule. And I think that, maybe beginning there, that really, in my mind, that I want to leave you open this and talk about what you think is most critical. But the overtime rule is really here and now. And I know that we want to make sure that we emphasize that for members for their own preparedness on that as well. So again, thank you. And I'll turn it over to you for anything you'd like to highlight for us.
Of course. Well, please, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts that would be helpful, please feel free to jump in. I'm really here to be of assistance in any way that I can. Just to kick it off, we've seen some pretty significant national policy trends impacting community-based services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I think it's been a long time since we've seen this focus, both in the administration and on the Hill, in strengthening access to services and supporting the direct support workforce. But how that plays out in the actual bills and the policies that we see really varies based on the regulation or the bill. With this particular time, with it being an election year and it being a pretty significant election year, we saw a big uptick in the last couple of months of new federal rulemaking that has either an indirect or a direct impact on the services that we offer. So I'm happy to talk about the overtime rule and the access rule, but also I can note some of the other regulations that came out around the same time that have a huge impact in our systems, but maybe didn't come as a forefront issue. I think you're totally right, Patrick, that the overtime rule and the changes to the salary threshold are probably the thing that has the biggest, most direct impact in the shortest amount of time of all of the rules that we're seeing, although there are much bigger systems reforms that came with the access rule. Those are much further spaced out. So just to kind of kick us off with the overtime rule, and please stop me if anyone has any thoughts or questions. But as a reminder, the overtime rule didn't change any of the tests associated with who is an exempt employee or who is not an exempt employee for purposes of overtime pay, but it did increase the standard salary threshold for administrative, executive, and professional employees. So right now it sits at, this can be calculated by the week or annually, but sits approximately 35,568 as the salary threshold we have now. But what the final overtime rule did is it provided a phased implementation of increasing that salary threshold. Beginning July 1st, 2024, so just in just about a month now, we'll see that raised to 43,888 annually, which is reflective of the 20th percentile of weekly earnings in the lowest wage census region. And then beginning January 1st, 2025, we'll see that jumped pretty significantly to 58,656. The last thing that the overtime rule really did that has a direct impact in our sector is it created an automatic updating mechanism so that the standard salary threshold beginning July 1st, 2027 and every 3 years thereafter will do an automatic adjusting to that 35th percentile of weekly earnings for full-time non-hourly workers in the lowest wage census region. So right now that's the South, but it's that mechanism allows it to be updated with the newest available data. So there's quite a lot that goes into that in terms of how we prepare and how we respond to what that fiscal impact will be for services. At the time it was a proposed rule, they were looking at approximately 55,000 as the new standard salary threshold, and Anchor did a fiscal impact study to see what the cost of implementing that rule on a national basis would be. And at that time, under a slightly lower threshold than what we're getting to in January, we were able to find just over $1 billion impact nationally to the cost of delivering services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And also alongside that, just over $1 billion, 1.1 billion in fiscal impact costs to new Medicaid spending. And that's really indicative of how many providers would need to shutter programs, curtail services, close doors in order to meet compliance with the new rule without any kind of additional funding, either from federal funding or increased reimbursement rates. Due to people who had been receiving services having to go into more costly hospital services, institutional services, anything if they weren't able to access those community-based services because providers either reduced the services they were offering or closed altogether. So at this stage, we have seen some litigation. If you were around in 2016, it probably feels a little bit similar. We saw a very similar increase to the standard salary threshold at that time, and what happened with that particular rule, which was introduced under the Obama administration, is it was immediately litigated, and the Fifth Circuit of Appeals found that that the Department of Labor had acted outside of its scope, that it had increased the standard salary threshold too far. And because of that precedent, we come into this new litigation questioning whether or not we will see those same results. But in the meantime, providers really need to be prepared to respond to the rule as it is, because we have no assurances that the same thing will happen through the litigation that's included today. And so the most important thing that we can be doing at this time is continuing to message that impact and engaging with our state agencies to make sure that they're considering whether reimbursement rates include necessary costs to meet this new expense to service delivery. So we here at Anchor are continuing to work with federal agencies to have a better understanding of this impact and ways to support providers. The Department of Labor included in their preamble to the final rule that they understood that they needed to work with CMS and ACL to really monitor and support providers delivering Medicaid funded services to people with disabilities. And so we plan to very much hold them to their word on that. and create new tools and opportunities for our members to really drive that point home when it comes to adequate funding in their own state systems.
So Lydia, I'll jump in and just encourage members to ask specific questions on implementation because, just to review what you said, current threshold on the salary level, 35,568, that's been there for a while. July 1, 43,888. January 1, 2025, 58,656. So that's not much of a gap. That's a pretty compressed timeline. So it's not as if you can kind of go to one increment. You kind of have to be thinking about this as a whole. I presume is sort of the recommendations and maybe the things that you've been hearing across the nation and from your members. And I will also just toss in because we were in an environment right now where our comment period is open for fee schedule rates. And if you've looked at rate assumptions, members, you'll see that ODP identifies a couple of things that are noteworthy. They first of all cite the 35,568 requirement, even though the rates are effective July 1, 2024. And as they've always done, they claim that they're only including overtime up to that level for people earning more than that, which seems to ignore, at least in my humble opinion, the duties test. Lydia. So we'll call that out, and actually, it's our intent in our comment letter to really just ask ODP why is their interpretation what it is. Now, I'll also backstop all of that by saying, we are supporting this budget so we get this rate increase. This is indeed, I think on the whole, 9.5% across the board. Obviously, that varies by service criteria, but that's a big movement. And also in PAR regulations do state that rate should be reflective of federal state changes, and this is a big one. So you've calculated the impact at Anchor. Again, that's north of $1 billion. I'm sorry, could you restate that?
Yeah, it's just over $1 billion impact. I can put in the chat also, if you go to our Overtime Rule Action Center, and you can get there either through our anchor.org website or you can just Google Anchor Overtime Rule Action Center, and you'll see all of our materials to date. And so all of that particular study is available. I'll also send it to Patrick separately so that you all have access to it as an attachment. But yes, just over $1 billion impact to service delivery expenses and a $1.1 billion impact to new Medicaid spending to meet the increased cost of people losing access to services.
Okay, and that's out there again, July 1. So we just want to make sure, again, with everything going on here, that members, as you have questions and you look to implement this, please use the Anchor resources. And again, thank you, Lydia. I know Craig does a great job curating a lot of the content from Anchor, getting that out in our updates. We'll make sure the link goes out as well with the meeting materials and recording of this meeting to all of our members, so including those who can't be there here with us today. So can we move on to Medicaid access? I guess compared to overtime, much more protracted period and a little less clear on how this will affect IDD providers right now. So that's why I kind of point to the overtime being more immediate and more of an immediate concern, but potentially great implications from the ensuring access to Medicaid services final rule also, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The access rule is enormous. It includes so many things. I saw in the chat a request to talk a little bit more about the 80% threshold and how it applies to IDD providers, and I'll certainly do that. But just noting that the rule as a whole is a complete system reform of so many pieces of home and community-based services, and largely positive. Even though it is a huge systems change, it's intended to create better transparency in the system and create new systems that have a little bit more of a standardized impact across state to state. So, for example, we see the creation of the Medicaid advisory committees and the beneficiary advisory councils, which would largely replace our medical care advisory committees that we have now, to make them have a little bit more teeth, a little bit more opportunity to really engage with the state, make recommendations and advisory content on access to Medicaid services. It includes, standardized processes for person-centered planning and grievances and appeals. It creates a new standardized system of incident management, which would require trends data that's that's able to be publicly posted and pulled from state systems, as well as creates a standard for what is a critical incident and what needs to be reported and what doesn't. It also establishes the HCBS quality measure set, but it also has quite a bit of reporting requirements that would give us a much better sense of how states are managing their wait lists, what are the utilization rates of services, are people receiving services in a timely manner, or are they having to go really long periods of time from the time they're authorized to the time they start receiving services because they can't find an available provider. So there's quite a bit that goes into it, and also a number of different ways for providers, beneficiaries, any stakeholder to really engage with this system and have access to the information. The public reporting requirement of reimbursement rates, and including things like when the rates were last updated, and transparency in the state website about how to access when a reimbursement rate may have gone too long without adjustment. It's going to be really helpful, I think, in our advocacy to not have to rely on institutional memory of when was the last time we had a rate study, and does so-and-so have a copy of that email correspondence. These things require it all to be very transparently posted on the state's website and reported to CMS in these aggregate trends data. But I will come to the HCBS payment adequacy provision, because that's the place where we saw that 80% threshold question, or the 80-20. And so the final rule was significantly is not probably the right word, but we did see some substantial changes to what was proposed and what was actually finalized. So just a couple of very quick level setting things. What that provision does is it requires that states ensure that each provider that's furnishing or delivering homemaker, home health aid, or personal care services spends 80% of those total payments that it receives for those services on compensation for the direct care workers who furnish those services. And there's a bunch of ifs, ands, and buts to that. They included excluded costs that don't have to be considered before applying that, or can be taken out before applying that 80%. They included the opportunity for states to create small provider, like a small provider process that utilizes a different percentage rate. And they also allow states to create a hardship exemption. So there's a couple things that go into how that 80% is actually calculated, and I'm happy to talk about that more too. But I think that one of the more important things for IDD providers to look at is whether or not any of the services that you're offering under your state waiver fall within this particular category of homemaker, home health aid, or personal care services. It is traditional for services provided for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities under a waiver model to be provided as what's called habilitation services. And habilitation services are not included in that 80% threshold. CMS proposed the rule and asked the question with regards to services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, should we include habilitation services in this 80% threshold? And ultimately the department decided, or CMS decided that they would not, that they did not have the data that they needed to really determine an adequate percentage. Unfortunately, I think one of the things that makes this feel a little bit more complicated for folks is states don't often name the services that they offer in alignment with the categories of services that are federally designated in a waiver service. So in a perfect world, states would call their services homemaker, home health aid, or personal care services, or habilitation services in the waiver application itself. But a lot of times states will come up with their own names for those services, even though they are, at the end of the day, habilitation services or are personal care services. I think this issue was also kind of confused a little bit through the EBV process, which indicated services that were not categorized as personal care services, but that had a component of personal care included in them to apply an EBV standard too. So all of that to say that it becomes incredibly important that providers and their state are on the same page about what the category of services that they've designated in their waiver to offer to people with intellectual and developmental disability services are. I would suggest, and I'm happy to be of assistance, that it's highly unlikely that services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are not habilitation services, because a real key component, or the key difference between these services and habilitation, the indicated services under the 80% threshold and habilitation services, is that habilitation services are a skill building service that's intended to promote community inclusion and integration. So it's not so much about performing a task on behalf of someone who otherwise would have been able to perform that task if not for the disability, as much as the service is intended to provide opportunities for that person to become as independent as possible. It's a skill building service at the end of the day. It could be offered in a residential model. It traditionally is offered in group home services as residential habilitation. It could be offered in a community supports program. I think that's another traditional model to have day habilitation services. But that conversation really needs to happen, and happen early, if you all have any question about whether or not your state would designate the services that you offer as habilitation services versus a different type of service.
Yeah, the EVV parallel makes a lot of sense, and similarly here in PA, that was something that there was questions and concern about. So is it correct to interpret, for right now, it appears we are okay if we're talking about direct support professionals, but we need to be very vigilant about watching what happens here and continuing our advocacy, and just again looking at what may occur. A lot in this document. So Craig, we can discuss it. It's 1,004 pages. There's a lot in there. We appreciate you coming in today to condense it down to as to really what we most need to know and be aware of it. And then the final enforcement does not occur for several years. Is that a 6-year cycle? Is that correct?
Yeah, so each part of the access rule has a different implementation deadline, and I think probably the earliest we'll see the earliest activity we'll see is on the HCBS quality measure set. The 80% threshold requirement doesn't come into place until for another 6 years, although there is a requirement in 4 years for states to start collecting information on this and reporting the percentages that folks are at. So 4 years at the earliest to start collecting information, but 6 years before we actually see any kind of implementation. And I did see just a quick question in the chat about whether or not the upcoming presidential election impacts any of these things. And I would just offer that if we do have a regulation that a new administration comes in and doesn't feel favorably about, nothing prevents that administration from rescinding the regulation or providing new regulations that change it. And so while we can't really predict the future on any of those things, the administration has a significant amount of discretion and latitude to change any of its regulations at any time.
Well, thank you, Liddy, for covering all of that in so much depth and detail. Any final thoughts you would like to cover just in terms of federal policy updates, national trends, anything else that you mentioned kind of at the top that you want to make sure that you call out for us and our members?
I think there's quite a bit of other rulemaking that happened around the same time. There was a prior authorization rule that changed the timelines for response and systems of response and prior authorization. We also saw the Section 504 regulations that really looked at how community integration it plays out in service delivery. There's a new standard regulation for adult protective services. The nursing home staffing regulations had a transparency provision that was very similar to the access rule in requiring transparency and reporting of ICF payments and spending as it relates to a percentage going to direct care compensation and support staff. And then we see all these, we've also seen a number of changes impacting beneficiary access to funding outside of Medicaid. So for example, we saw changes to the calculations for Social Security and social and SSI. So, there's so much going on. It's really, really easy to get stuck in the weeds. It's easy to miss some major changes. And so I would just encourage folks, if I can be of assistance to you at any time, if you see something, you have a quick question, the best thing that we can do through this period of enormous proposals and changes is stay connected with each other, connected with your provider network, connected to your state association, because the way we get through this is together.
Yeah, thanks for that advice, Lydia, and thank you so much for being here today. Again, as we collect any questions here, we'll make sure we follow up with members, and we'll try to make sure we share everything that you've referenced today to make sure everybody remains informed on all this important material. So have a great rest of your day and weekend. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Okay, I'd now like to bring in and welcome Stacy DeStefano, Chief Executive Officer from Consulting for Human Services. Stacy, welcome, and I know you have a very strong connection with Anchor as well, so I appreciate you being here today. And Craig, if you can go to the next slide, I think that we've just covered a lot of material from both the state and federal levels. So, we want to kind of level set and roundabout in terms of a way that we can talk about strategies for success and really bring you in to talk about some of the engagement practices and things you do. But I first want to give you the chance to talk a little bit about yourself and about the work you do with Consulting for Human Services. So welcome and thank you once again for being here, Stacy.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm remoting in from DC today instead of Pennsylvania, but a nice dovetail to Lydia and Jeremy. CFHS is the retained strategic advisory firm for Anchor, so we do have a contracted relationship. They provide the policy, the legislative, the rates. What Lydia just discussed so well a few moments ago, and we really step in on the market intelligence, the strategy, the fractional C-suite, a lot of merger and acquisition, growth kind of discussion, organizational structure. So it's more of the tactical operational piece. We leave the policy and the legislative to folks like you and to Anchor, but really dive deep in the weeds with organizations around the country. So I know many folks on the call, really happy to see some familiar names there. I've been in the field for almost 30 years, mental health clinician. I've worked in community behavioral health, IDD services, addiction, homelessness, mental health for many, many decades, and started CFHS about 3 years ago to increase the business acumen of nonprofit providers, because we've really seen an influx of private equity and shifts like, performance-based contracting and managed care happening in our space on the IDD side, that we thought we really needed to step in and help give some good guidance to organizations to stay sustainable and healthy. So we've done that. We have about 50 folks around the country. We work with organizations of all sizes, from $2 million providers in Iowa to, $600 million national providers that are based here in PA. So really happy to join and have a Q&A with you.
Yeah, that's great. So do you see any parallels in other states? I know you're familiar with what we're doing here, and being that you work with all size providers and all across the country, it's hard for us to sort of size up when we talk about a new waiver and so many pieces of it yet to be developed, and we don't really see anything to kind of benchmark against. Do you see it any differently in terms of what you see happening in other states or what your other clients are going through?
We do. And I've had the pleasure of doing the keynote for about 6 different states, provider associations on the IDD side just this year, most recently Maine and Georgia. But we talk with IDD directors and, folks who are stakeholders in the field on a regular basis. And that's how we kind of build our market intelligence. And we hear lots of states echoing what we see in Pennsylvania more overtly. We have this, piece in Pennsylvania that Jeremy talked about, where it's, we're moving in a direction of, the reality is provider consolidation, right? And we have a very fragmented IDD provider community nationally. There's over 100,000 providers, and only 20% of those are anchored to any sort of state or national association like yours or like Anchor. So there's 80% of folks sort of out there untethered doing their own thing. And states are starting to say, we can't manage that. We can't manage, 1,000 contracts in a state. And you look at other state like Maine, where I just was speaking to them last week, they have providers there. None are bigger than 20 million. And so it's a state that's full of rural areas, small providers, and lots of small, maybe 1 to 2 person home for-profit, personal providers there. And so that's an interesting mix that we're seeing in some other states as well. So I think this is a movement to do a couple things. It's a national movement to increase quality, to professionalize the industry a little more. And then the reality is there's just too many providers to contract with. So I do think that's the undercurrent that we're seeing nationally, is that trying to move people into partnerships or mergers that make sense for scale.
Yeah, and I think you've hit upon something here in terms of smaller organizations. If you're on earlier, you've seen that,
Yeah.
We developed a mobile app. And I can tell you personally, one of the reasons that I felt strongly about that was smaller organizations that we were talking to, having meetings with, and being in the field, doing the work, being with individuals and DSPs. And how do we reach those people with information? How do we give them access? How do we connect them to our community? So, we have an emphasis on doing that. I think our theme around performance-based contracting, will remain what to know and how to succeed. So I think that, we recognize and really believe that you have the capability of succeeding no matter what size organization you are. Policy making, I agree, will certainly drive things in certain directions. But there have historically been drivers, as you well know, that have occurred that have created these sort of waves in the past. This is something that feels very, permanent. It's here, it's real. And I think we're here to sort of make sure people recognize that and that we're here to help them succeed. So just navigating change in general, to the extent that, that anything you're talking about is a change, whether it's organizations getting together to talk about a merger or acquisition. And I think something that we are sort of recognizing and we're saying out loud, you're not going to be able to get through this on your own. And that may not mean merger acquisition, but it may mean partnership.
That's right.
Even when we talk about thinking ahead to our next workshop, infrastructure, but infrastructure often likewise involves partnership. You have to have a good partner to deliver information. So to kind of shed some light on, what do you think organizations need to be really looking at today when, this compressed time frame, decisions have to be made. If you're thinking longer term strategically, I agree. What's the landscape look like after this 3-year cycle? We want to be the head of the curve on that and not sort of let the system impose its will on people who are sort of on one level resisting it, or at the same time just can't match up resources. We think we can be here to deliver some of those connections. So what do you think about the navigating change and how have you helped your clients there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. And the one thing I want to make sure I say, because I've been told I'm equal parts endearing and frightening when I talk about M&A, and I don't want to be on the frightening side, you can absolutely be successful as a small provider. So this is not to say that everyone needs to have some kind of an M&A strategy, but you have to have a discussion, right, about your size and your strengths and do sort of an internal self-assessment. And we have tools on our website that are free for providers to do their own self-assessment. You can download that and do it on your own. We don't track you or market to you. It's a free resource. But taking a look at what are the things you can outsource, right? Because I think historically, small providers tend to want to do too much themselves. Right. And if you think about your own home, right, you probably outsource your lawn care or maybe cleaning or maybe things like Instacart for grocery shopping or getting your taxes done. You don't do everything yourself in-house, right? And so same thinking around an organization. What are the pieces you can outsource? Can you outsource revenue cycle or billing or fleet management or some piece of that makes your focus kind of laser sharp on service delivery, the things that you do really well? Thanks, Craig. I appreciate you pulling that up. But I think that one piece for sure, you have to have this mentality that what got you here in 2024 is not going to get you there in the next 5 years. So some thinking around how do we pivot? How do we stay open to innovation and do things differently? Because we're in a brand new post-COVID environment. And one of those things is technology. And so technology and AI specifically, to think about them not as a replacement at all for folks, but as a care extender and an enhancement to care. So critical, even when you think about back office pieces, case notes, and there's now this ambient learning where you can, document using AI, where it takes away some of the burden of your DSPs. There's lots of tools that we're starting to see where technology can really enable some great services, but also thinking about that on the business side. So those are realities that are here. Like we've been using ChatGPT and AI for 50 years, things like GPS, chatbots. So this isn't something new. It's something that you want to go slowly into, but you will not be here for sure if you kind of stiff arm and say, we're not going to ever think about using that.
Yeah. Yeah, so can you give a few examples of how you're using effectively artificial intelligence? I likewise use it here. I think it's a great way to sort of leverage some limited resources and get information out to people. So
Yeah.
how are you using it for yourself and with clients?
Yeah, I mean, on a very basic level, we were able to eliminate an executive assistant administrative position, and we use a tool. This is no endorsement for the tool. You can use whatever you like, but we vetted many, and we use a tool called Grain AI, and it just attaches to your Zoom or team meetings. It records the meeting. It does the transcription. It does next steps for you, and you can cue it while you're speaking to actually put things on your calendar. And that does that within minutes of the meeting ending. So we were able to eliminate like a $30 an hour position with an AI tool that costs us $20 a month. So just a very basic, right? And then when you think about ChatGPT and those tools, when you use them safely and you use them, that you make sure within the bounds of your technology platforms, you can do things like reviewing case notes. You can do things like reviewing a schedule for staffing. You can look at, why one house maybe uses more overtime than another. I mean, there's all sorts of tools, limitless possibilities, and it really makes sense to have someone on your team that either enjoys that and can be your AI expert, or just to spend a little bit of money with a tech expert to help you implement some of those things. So lots of tools with AI, but even to support from an emotional sense, lots of apps on mindfulness and mental health that can be really helpful and effective for folks with IDD as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so certainly, doing research, I found it useful. And you just said something I almost want to jump to immediately, just the motivating engagement. Some of your work around, kind of, I'll say like when you're just not feeling it and everything feels overwhelming, how do you continue to do that? And I certainly want you to talk about that. But to just backtrack to sort of the landscape, are you seeing similarities anywhere with the type of waiver and the application of the waiver that we're embarking upon here in Pennsylvania? Or is it just really its own thing right now? Is it something that you think is unique, or do you see parallels with other states in terms of exactly what PA is doing with the res and how they're building it with tiers and those sorts of things? And what, we don't have a good look at it yet, but what their alternative payment model may look like, at least how it's been described.
Yeah, I mean, states like Iowa have looked at tiers for, since they started managed care, 10 years ago. And so I think different states are in different discussions about what works for them. There's a lot of fear and resistance because this is, as you well know, this is a field that hasn't had a lot of innovation for the last 50 years. And now we're starting to see, the tail end kind of whipping around. And lots of different pieces at once moving. So it feels unstable. It feels scary to a lot of folks who like status quo. This isn't the time in human services to anchor on to status quo. But I think around the waivers, the most exciting piece I'm seeing is the adoption of technology and paying for it. So states like Arkansas and Tennessee, even New Jersey starting to pay for technology-enabled services, with a CPT code and a rate. That gives us tons of leverage as IDD providers to integrate technology into care and also to integrate the mental health piece, right? Because we know lots of our folks can benefit from mental health services. So if you can expand and differentiate your revenue and add in some mental health payment from Medicaid that's outside of waiver dollars, even better. So those are the kinds of things that we're seeing states really pick up on.
Yeah. Yeah, and diversification probably even within IDD services, here in Pennsylvania. Certainly, if you can get another revenue stream, another geographical area. But I think to your point, innovation, it is how ODP is telling us to define success. A lot of that's technical. And I think that's why here we are sort of looking at the what to know, how to succeed. And ODP can deliver the what to know. We want good policy information, and we want some of the background of that. But we really feel like there's a lot is within our own power to really succeed and find our lanes and find how we can be successful in this new system. The first step being really knowing all you can about it. So let me go back into the motivating engagement and the sort of thing that I know you kind of champion in terms of how you get through and navigate these difficult situations. When in many cases, and this happens in leadership, you don't ask for everything yet, but what can you tell us there that could be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think the old way of strategic planning is kind of passé. It's gone out with the flip phone, right? It no longer are you going to do this huge, $50,000 strategic plan where it takes 6 months and there's stakeholder interviews and boards and you sort of check the box and put it on the shelf, right? I see now with what the work we're doing is we've really turned that into a much more focused tactical plan. What are you going to do over the next 18 months, right? Because if you're talking about strategy past 18 months from now, you're going to lose your team, right? It's just too far ahead. They need to have hope now in the next 6 to 18 months. What do you do differently? How do you have a mindset that is ready for change and embraces change and is not kind of wincing, holding on to the dashboard, saying, we don't want to take this turn too fast? It's really getting your team motivated for what it looks like, what they're able to do. And then the other thing that we've seen is taking a look at your organizational structure. So what we have found is, I'm a great example of that. I'm a clinician that kind of raised my hand to be a leader over different points of my career and ended up, as COO of a couple of multi-state providers with zero MBA or business background. And so understanding where people are in their career and what you can teach them and where they may want to shift, right? So you may not have the right people in the right roles today for success over the next 5 years. That doesn't mean fire everyone, but doing an organizational assessment to understand people's strength and where they can pivot and where they can be really strong to help you get to the next level. So I think that's what we're seeing for organizations that are really excited and going fast in the future is a real kind of hard look at themselves in the mirror and saying, okay, we really want to see where we're our own internal SWOT analysis here and where we can get better. So I think people get motivated when they see your willingness to change and sort of skate to where the puck is rather than hang on to where you think it is today.
Yeah, yeah. Any advice on how you sort of, not completely disconnect from, say, regulations and ODP policy, but how do you sort of take the lead for your organization on how, that's a component you have to be aware of and look at and drives a lot of decision making, but the power to really make your own decisions and set your own course to be successful, are the things that you look at in terms of the service offerings and the rates. Do you take a deep dive into where can you make money versus maybe the services that you're offering today aren't great services for you?
Yeah, I mean, I say this all the time, the 501c3 is a tax status. It's not a business model. Every organization should be trying to make money. If you're managing to zero, you're not doing it right. That's not going to give you any stability. And we see that with some of the larger providers that are in financial duress right now, which is scary to us, industry veterans. But I think you need to think about, different revenue streams and look at collaborative care models and look at integrated care and where can you bring in behavioral health. And that's really the strong organization of the future of any size is one that can diversify revenue and look at whole person care, regardless of what the state and the regs are doing. That's always going to be a successful model. And when you weave in technology to all of those things, even better. I wanted to just address a quick question in the chat, if I can, Pat.
Sure.
Yeah, the question around what is the upside to all the consolidation, because I do think that's a great point that folks need to understand. And I just had this discussion with the main providers last week, when I mentioned there's none that are bigger than 20 million. And when you think about, say, 5 organizations that are $20 million each, and they each have an executive director or CEO, right? They have a CFO, they have a compliance person, an HR person, a clinical person, all those things, residential director. And then you think of $100 million organization that has one of those things, right? The economy of scale is so obvious and off the top, but it's also starting to be seen as almost a misuse of Medicaid funding. If you have that fragmentation and you have so much administrative overhead and duplication in 5 similar organizations in the same geography doing the same thing, right? It makes so much more sense and a better use of the waiver dollars to consolidate into larger where there's better scale. And then you also have shared talent, just the finance and the economics, the unit economics of that makes so much sense, but there's also less competition and more ability to move folks through different levels of care and support. So I think the upside is the savings, but also it's much less stress on the organization in the long run. So it's not growth for growth's sake. I'm a big proponent of matching with mission. You know, there's a lot of bad actors there, sending out blind LOIs, trying to acquire folks. That is never the way to go. If you get an unsolicited LOI from a company giving you an offer that sounds too good to be true, please throw it in the garbage or write your grocery list on the back of it. But we're talking about meaningful, intentional partnerships between good, like-minded organizations from a position of strength. So I just want to clarify that piece.
Yeah, and good and like-minded, and I've been, I've participated in a few throughout my career, and I think we always looked at the values of the organization, the alignment between the culture, the values. Was it a good fit? There's a lot of time and due diligence that goes into that. So
Yes,
yeah,
there should be.
I'm sorry, we're at the bottom of the hour already. I would like to continue. I'll give you the last word here on anything you'd like to highlight. And thank you for being here with us again today, Stacey.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to say thank you to the folks here. It is so hard to do this work today. Fee for service is such an unsustainable business model. It's so difficult on razor-thin margins with such incredibly important work. My son, I have a 22-year-old son with IDD, and so I understand from the parent perspective as well, and just really appreciate the diligence and the dedication of especially folks in Pennsylvania. Really see this as an elevated state for providers and appreciate the work you do.
Well, thank you again, Stacey. Have a great rest of your day and weekend. And Craig, we'll go to the last slide for just final thoughts. I won't take up much time other than to thank our guests, and I will add my thanks and gratitude to yours, Stacey, for all of our members and what they do today. Please contact your legislators. Remember to submit your comment letters for both performance-based contracting and the fee schedule rates. And we will keep in touch with all of you with the latest information. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. We will see you soon.